I was 16 years old, standing on the curb of O'Hare International Airport in my Christmas pajamas, holding a single suitcase. It was snowing. Inside the car, the woman who had raised me rolled up the window without even looking at me. "Your real family is there," she said through the glass. "You've never been ours." Then they drove away. I didn't know it then, but that moment wasn't just an ending. It was the start of a 12-year journey that would lead me to a vineyard in Provence, a grandmother I thought was dead, and a $23 million inheritance. And the people who left me in the snow, they were about to learn that the girl they abandoned wasn't just going to survive. She was going to win. My name is Harper, and for the first time in a long time, I can say that without flinching. I am 28 years old. I am an architect. I am the owner of a vineyard estate in Provence that smells like lavender and old money. But to understand how I got here, you have to understand where I started, or rather, where they left me. It was 12 years ago, but the memory is sharper than the blueprint I was drafting this morning. It was Christmas Eve. In most houses on our block in Chicago, there were trees in the windows, stockings hung by the fireplace, the warm glow of families pretending everything was perfect. In the Ashford house, there was nothing. No tree, no presents, just a strange, heavy silence that had been pressing down on the walls for weeks. I remember sitting in my bedroom in the basement, the one with the small window near the ceiling that let in slivers of gray winter light, wondering why I hadn't been asked to help decorate. I was 16, old enough to sense the shift in the air, but young enough to still hope it was just a busy year. I was wrong. The silence wasn't a lack of celebration. It was an evacuation. My adoptive father, Richard, called me upstairs after dinner. The house felt cold, colder than the weather outside. My adoptive mother, Deanne, was already wearing her coat. A suitcase sat by the door. My suitcase. I recognized the sticker I had put on it from a summer camp I attended 3 years ago, the only summer camp they ever sent me to. I asked what was happening, my voice trembling because deep down, I already knew. Nothing good ever started with a packed suitcase and a silent mother. Richard handed me an envelope. It was heavy, stiff. Inside was a plane ticket, one way to Paris. The destination didn't register. The dates did. Tonight, in 2 hours, I looked at Diane, searching for the woman who had bandaged my scraped knees when I was 7, who had helped me with my math homework when I was 10. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the door. "Your real family is in France," she said, her voice flat, rehearsed. "Your mother died there. Your people are there. You've never really been ours, Harper. We tried." She gave a small shrug, a gesture that dismissed 13 years of my life as easily as dismissing a bad entree at a restaurant. "It's time." I remember the smell of gingerbread wafting in from the neighbor's kitchen. It was a cruel sensory contrast to the sterility of the hallway. I begged, I pleaded. I asked what I had done, promised to do better, to be quieter, to eat less, anything to stop the train that was hurtling down the tracks. But Richard just looked at his watch. "The car's running," he said. "Get your coat." The drive to O'Hare was silent. It was 20 minutes of my life that felt like 20 years. Diane sat in the passenger seat, her back to me, her silhouette rigid. Richard drove with both hands on the wheel, staring straight ahead. Not a word of comfort, not a glance in the rearview mirror. When we pulled up to the departure's curb, the cold Chicago air hit me like a slap. Richard got out, pulled my suitcase from the trunk, and set it on the pavement. "There's an address inside," he said, his breath fogging in the air. "A group home in Marseille. They're expecting you." Then he got back in the car. Diane never turned around. The car pulled away, and I watched the taillights fade into the Christmas traffic, carrying away the only family I had ever known. I was 16 years old. I was wearing flannel pajamas and a thin winter coat. I had $50 in my pocket, a suitcase full of clothes that weren't warm enough for a Chicago winter, let alone a flight across the Atlantic, and a ticket to a country where I didn't speak a single word of the language. They told me my mother died in Marseille. They told me I had no one else. They lied. That was the first truth I learned on the cold floor of that airport terminal. The Ashfords were capable of cruelty I couldn't comprehend. But the second truth, the one that took me 12 years to discover, was much worse. I landed in Paris, terrified and alone, unable to ask for directions to the connecting flight to Marseille. I slept on a bench in the terminal that night, clutching my suitcase, terrified that if I fell asleep, someone would steal it and I would have nothing. When I finally made it to Marseille 3 days later, having survived on vending machine snacks and the kindness of a flight attendant who sensed my panic, The group home was a gray, concrete building that smelled like bleach and despair. I spent the next 2 years there. I learned French by watching television and memorizing street signs. I scrubbed floors in a local cafe to earn money for a used textbook. I studied at night while the other girls slept, driven by a cold, hard fire in my chest. I wasn't going to be the girl they left behind. I was going to be someone they could never ignore. I put myself through university in Lyon. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I studied architecture because I wanted to build things that lasted, things that couldn't be taken away from you in a snowy driveway. I graduated with honors. I got a job at a firm. I rented a small apartment, filled it with books and plants, and I stopped crying. I stopped wondering why they didn't love me. I decided that their lack of love wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of their capacity. I built a life from nothing. I built a soul from scratch. I thought I had closed the book on the Ashfords. I thought they were just a bad dream I had shaken off. Then, 3 weeks ago, the phone rang. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at my desk in Lyon, reviewing blueprints for a renovation project, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a life well-ordered. My phone buzzed, unknown number. A French area code I didn't recognize. I answered it, expecting a client or perhaps a wrong number. The voice on the other end was formal, measured, a voice used to delivering bad news with professional detachment. "Miss Ashford?" the man asked. "My name is Maître Jean-Pierre Dubois. I am an estate attorney based in Aix-en-Provence." My stomach tightened. Estate attorney, that meant death. I felt a flicker of panic, wondering if a friend had been in an accident. "I am calling regarding Marguerite Delacroix," he continued. "Your maternal grandmother." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I gripped the edge of my desk. "I'm sorry," I managed. "My grandmother." The Ashfords had told me my grandmother died years ago. They told me she was a bitter old woman who wanted nothing to do with me. They said there was no one left in France. "Yes," Maître Dubois said gently. "I regret to inform you that Madame Delacroix passed away 2 weeks ago. She was 89. I couldn't speak. The woman who was supposed to be dead, the woman I was told hated me, had actually been alive all this time. And now she was gone. "Miss Ashford, are you still there?" "Yes," I whispered. I didn't know she was alive." There was a pause on the other end. When Maître Dubois spoke again, his voice was softer. "Madame Delacroix was aware of that. She left specific instructions in her will. You are her sole beneficiary." The word beneficiary floated in the air, foreign and strange. "Sole beneficiary? She left you everything," he said. "The vineyard estate in Provence, the villa, her investments. In total, approximately 23 million euros. The number didn't register. It was too large, too abstract. But then the reality of it began to settle in. 23 million euros, a vineyard, a grandmother who had left me everything. My throat closed up, not because of the money, but because of the connection. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. There was someone out there who shared my blood, who knew I existed, and who had cared enough to leave me her legacy. But why hadn't she reached out? Why had she let me struggle? Maître Dubois seemed to anticipate my question. "There is something else you should know," he added. "Your grandmother hired investigators to track your life after you arrived in France. She knew where you were. She knew what you accomplished. She watched from a distance for 12 years. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. A stranger who shared my DNA had watched me scrub floors, struggle with language, study by candlelight, and cry myself to sleep in a group home, and she had never stepped in. "Why?" I whispered, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. "Why didn't she contact me?" "She had her reasons," Maître Dubois said. "They are explained in a letter she left for you, but first there is a complication. Someone is contesting the will." I froze. "Who?" "Your adoptive parents," he said. "Richard and Diane Ashford." That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my apartment with a glass of wine I couldn't drink, staring at the wall. The memories I had buried came flooding back, not as dull aches, but as sharp, jagged shards. Christmas Eve, the pajamas, the airport, the silence. And now, 12 years later, they wanted my inheritance. The people who told me I was never theirs, who drove away and left me to the wolves, suddenly remembered they were my parents when the number 23 million was on the table. My phone buzzed late in the night. A text from Maître Dubois. "Call me tomorrow. There is something in the adoption file you need to see." The legal documents arrived by courier the next morning. I spread them across my kitchen table, my hands shaking as I read the complaint. Richard and Diane Ashford, plaintiffs, V's estate of Marguerite Delacroix. Their argument was simple, audacious, and sickening. They claimed they had raised me for 13 years. They had fed me, clothed me, educated me. Under certain interpretations of American family law, and they were testing the waters in French court too. They claimed a right to a portion of any inheritance I received as a minor or would have received had they maintained custody. They were asking for 50%, 11.5 million euros, for abandoning me at an airport in my pajamas. I felt a scream building in my chest, a primal sound of pure rage. I called Sophie, my best friend and coworker. She came over during her lunch break and found me sitting on the floor, surrounded by papers that felt like they were covered in blood rather than ink. "They can't actually win this, can they?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie picked up the complaint and scanned it, her face hardening. "They're not trying to win," she said, her voice grim. "They're trying to pressure you into settling. They know you don't want a public fight. They're betting you'll pay them to go away." She was right. I hated conflict. I had spent 12 years trying to forget these people existed, trying to heal the wound they left behind. But as I looked at their names on that legal document, the wound turned into a scar, and the scar turned into armor. How had they even found out? I had only learned about it yesterday. Sophie scrolled through her phone and handed it to me. It was a Facebook post from Diane, a long, tearful message titled "The Daughter We Lost and the Greed That Tore Us Apart." She had tagged my old American account, the one I hadn't used in years. The post had 3,000 shares. Our beautiful Harper, taken from us by the lies of a foreign lawyer. We only wanted what was best for her. Family is everything. It was a master class in manipulation. And buried in the comments, someone had written, "I heard she inherited millions from some European relative, her poor parents." Diane had made sure everyone knew. She was controlling the narrative before I even knew there was a story to tell. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. I recognized the area code this time. Chicago. I answered, my grip on the phone tight enough to crack the screen. "Harper, sweetheart." Diane's voice was thick with tears, the same performance she had perfected over 13 years. "We need to talk." I should have hung up. I should have blocked the number, but I needed to hear it. I needed to know what I was dealing with. "Diane," I said, keeping my voice flat, void of the emotion that was roiling inside me. "Why are you suing me?" There was a sharp intake of breath, a wounded gasp that sounded almost genuine. "Suing, honey, that's such an ugly word. We're not suing you. We're just trying to protect what's fair for the family." "What family?" I asked. "You told me I was never part of yours." There was a pause, a momentary glitch in the script. Then she recovered. "Oh, Harper, you were so young, you misunderstood. We were trying to help you find your roots. We thought it was what you needed." I heard Richard's voice in the background, muffled, urgent. Then he came on the line. "Harper, let's not make this adversarial. Your grandmother, rest her soul, didn't know our family. She didn't know how much we sacrificed for you. If she had, she would have wanted us included." "You sent me away," I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with the effort of controlling my rage. "We sent you to find your heritage," Richard countered smoothly. "That's different." I was 16. I didn't speak French. I ended up in a group home. "And look at you now," Diane cut in, back on the phone. "You turned out fine. That proves we made the right decision." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It was a cold, hollow sound. "You're serious," I said. "You actually believe that?" "We believe in family," Richard said, his voice hardening. "Unlike some people, here's what I believe," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected. "I believe I'm done with this conversation. I believe your lawyers can talk to my lawyer, and I believe that if you contact me directly again, I'll consider it harassment. Goodbye, Richard." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but something inside me felt solid for the first time in days. I didn't owe them explanations. I owed them nothing. They didn't listen. 2 days later, Diane called again from a different number. "Baby girl, please don't shut us out," she pleaded. I let her talk. I wanted to understand the depth of their delusion. "Mommy just wants to make things right," she cooed. "We can be a family again, all this legal nonsense. It's just paperwork. What matters is that we love you." "If you love me," I said slowly, "why are you suing me?" "We're not suing you, sweetheart. We're protecting you. That French lawyer doesn't have your best interests at heart, but we know you. We raised you." Richard's voice came through on speakerphone. "Harper, let's meet in person in Provence. We'll fly over next week, sit down like a family, and sort this out without lawyers poisoning everything." "Without lawyers," I repeated. "Just us, the people who matter." I thought about what Sophie had said. They were betting I would pay them to go away. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "Why not?" Diane's voice sharpened, then softened instantly. Honey, we're your parents, you can trust us. You drove me to an airport in my pajamas and left me there. Silence. Then Richard, his voice dropping an octave. You're remembering it wrong, you wanted to go, you were curious about France. I was crying, I begged you not to leave me. Children cry about everything, Diane chimed in, her voice dismissive. It doesn't mean… I'm not a child anymore, I cut her off. And I'm not remembering it wrong. Diane made a small, wounded sound. You're breaking my heart, Harper. You broke mine first, I said. I hung up and blocked the number. I called Maître Dubois. They want to meet, I told him. Without lawyers, they called it a family discussion. Absolutely not, he said, his voice firm. That is a negotiating tactic. They want to pressure you into an agreement before you understand your legal position. I figured as much, but then his tone changed. Harper, there's something I need to tell you. I've been looking into the adoption records. Your grandmother requested copies years ago. I sat up straighter. What did you find? Richard Ashford worked in banking in the early 2000s. Specifically, he handled international wire transfers for high-net-worth clients, including the Delacqua family. The room seemed to tilt. He knew about my grandmother before they adopted me. It appears so. I can't prove intent yet, but the timeline is suggestive. I thought about 13 years of birthday cards signed, love, mom and dad. 13 years of being told I was lucky they chose me. 13 years of feeling like I owed them something I could never repay. Was any of it real? I don't know, Maître Dubois said gently, answering my unasked question. But I have a contact, a social worker in Chicago who handled adoptions in that period. She's retired now, but she kept copies of her files. She's been following the news coverage of the lawsuit. She reached out to me directly. She says she has information. She used an interesting word. She said she wanted to make things right. That night, an email arrived from a woman named Claire Donovan. The subject line read, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I didn't have time to process it because the next morning they showed up. I was at Maître Dubois' office in Aix-en-Provence reviewing documents when his assistant knocked on the door. There are people in the lobby, she said, looking uncomfortable. They say they're your parents. My blood went cold. Tell them to leave. They're insisting. They brought a young woman with them. They say they won't leave until you see them. Maître Dubois looked at me. You don't have to do this. I know, I stood up, smoothing my skirt, but I need to see their faces. I need to know what I'm dealing with. We walked to the lobby together. There they were. Richard in a pressed blazer, looking like he'd just stepped off a golf course, smiling with that slick, used-car salesman charm. Diane in a floral dress, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. And beside them, a young woman I barely recognized. Megan, the girl they'd adopted 2 years after me. The one who got the piano lessons, the summer camps, the bedroom upstairs with the bay window. She was 24 now, pretty, and looked terrified. Harper. Diane rushed toward me, arms outstretched. I stepped back. Don't touch me. She froze, her face crumpling. Baby, I'm not your baby. I'm not your daughter. I'm not your anything. Richard put a hand on Diane's shoulder, the supportive husband playing his part. Harper, there's no need for hostility. We came all this way. The least you can do is hear us out. You came uninvited, you're interfering with legal proceedings, and you brought… I looked at Megan. Why are you here? Megan's voice was small. I said you might want to meet me, that we could be sisters. Something twisted in my chest. It wasn't her fault. She was another prop in their performance. You're not part of this, I told her as gently as I could. This isn't about you. Diane started sobbing louder. She turned to Maître Dubois. You see what she's become. We lost our daughter. Maître Dubois looked at her evenly. Madame Ashford, my client, has asked you not to touch her. I suggest you respect that boundary. Boundary. Richard scoffed. Family doesn't have boundaries. Mine does, I said. After they were escorted out by security, Maître Dubois pulled out a worn manila folder. I was going to wait, he said, but I think you need to see this now. He spread several documents across his desk. Adoption agency paperwork dated 2001. These are copies from the original file. Your grandmother obtained them through legal channels years ago. I scanned the pages. Standard forms, background checks. Then I saw it. A single line highlighted in yellow. Family background of child. Maternal grandmother Marguerite Delacqua residing in Provence, France. Significant assets reported. They knew, I said, the words coming out hollow. They knew before they signed the adoption papers. Maître Dubois pointed to another document. This is a note from the agency caseworker. She flagged the application because Richard Ashford asked multiple questions about your biological family's financial status. She found it unusual. Unusual. The word she used in her notes was concerning, but the adoption went through anyway. I stared at the papers. 13 years of my life, reduced to a line item. Your grandmother tried to make contact when you were 8, he continued. She sent letters, gifts. The Ashfords returned everything unopened. They told her you didn't want a relationship. I didn't know she existed. I know, she knew that too, eventually. That's why she kept her distance after you came to France. She didn't want to intrude on the life you'd built. She watched you struggle for 12 years. She watched you succeed. She wanted you to know you could do it on your own. Then she wanted to give you everything she had. My eyes burned. There's more in these files, he said, but it will take time to verify. The social worker, Claire Donovan, she has the rest of the pieces. She's flying in next week. She wants to testify in person. That night, I read Claire Donovan's email 7 times. She had processed the paperwork in 2001. She had flagged her concerns and been told she was paranoid. But she had saved a backup copy of a specific email. An email Richard Ashford had accidentally CC'd to the agency when corresponding with his private attorney. The date was December 15th, 2014, 9 days before they sent me to France. I scrolled down to the attachment. My heart hammered against my ribs as I read the words that would change everything. The long-term financial potential of the child has not materialized as projected. Establishing legal parenthood was a prerequisite for inheritance claims, but the grandmother is uncooperative. We are considering cutting our losses. It may be time to close the book on this investment and move on. I sat in the dark for a long time, holding my phone. 9 days. They had planned it 9 days before Christmas. All those years I had wondered what I had done wrong, what I could have changed. The answer was nothing. It was never about me. It was always about money. I was never a daughter. I was a stock option that failed to pay out. The mediation was held a week later in a small hearing room at the Aix-en-Provence courthouse. High ceilings, tall windows, the French coat of arms mounted on the wall behind the mediator's bench. I arrived early with Sophie. We sat on one side of the U-shaped table. Maître Dubois beside me, his files organized in neat stacks. The Ashfords came in 5 minutes late. A power move. Richard walked like he owned the room. Diane had fresh tears already glistening. Their attorney carried an oversized briefcase. But I barely noticed them because sitting in the row of chairs behind us was Claire Donovan. She was smaller than I'd imagined, gray-haired, maybe late 50s, wearing a simple navy blazer. When our eyes met, she nodded once. Steady, certain. She had flown across an ocean to be here. For me, the mediator, Judge Marat, was a woman in her 60s, crisp and no-nonsense. Are all parties present? She asked. Present for the petitioners, the Ashford attorney said. Present for the respondent, Maître Dubois replied. Judge Marat reviewed her notes. Mr. Ashford, Mrs. Ashford, before we proceed, I have a simple question. Richard straightened. Of course, Your Honor. Prior to adopting Harper Ashford, were you aware of the existence and financial status of her biological grandmother, Marguerite Delacroix? The room went still. Richard's smile stayed fixed, but his hands went very still on the table. Absolutely not, he said, his voice steady. We had no knowledge of. Thank you, Judge Marat cut him off. She made a note. Counsel for the respondent, you may present your evidence. Maître Dubois stood up. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit A. He passed copies around. This is an email dated March 15th, 2001, 6 weeks before the Ashfords' adoption of Harper was finalized. It was sent by Richard Ashford to his personal attorney and inadvertently CC'd to the adoption agency. I watched Richard. He was still smiling, but it looked like a rictus of terror. The email discusses the financial assets of the biological family. It reads, the child has a maternal grandmother residing in Provence, France with significant assets. If we establish legal parenthood, we position ourselves favorably for any future inheritance claims. This is a long-term investment. The words hung in the air. Diane let out a small gasp. Judge Marat read the email in silence. Her expression didn't change, but her jaw tightened. She looked at Claire Donovan. Miss Donovan, can you verify this document? Claire stood. Her voice was clear. Yes, Your Honor, I received this email on that date. I flagged it to my supervisor. I was told to proceed. I have regretted that decision for 16 years. I heard Diane start to cry. Real tears this time. Richard's smile was gone. I have one additional item, Maître Dubois said. He withdrew a sealed envelope from his briefcase. This is a letter written by Marguerite Delacroix included with her will. Per her instructions, it is to be read aloud at any legal proceeding concerning the estate. Judge Marat nodded. Proceed. Maître Dubois broke the seal. My hands were shaking as he began to read. My dearest Harper, by the time you hear this, I will be gone. But I want you to know the truth, all of it. I knew about you from the day you were born. Your mother, my daughter Elise, sent me photographs every week. When she died, I wanted to raise you myself, but I was 71 and living in another country. When the Ashfords adopted you, I was hopeful. I wrote letters. I sent gifts. Every single one was returned unopened. They told me you wanted nothing to do with me. I believed them. Until I learned otherwise. In 2014, your adoptive parents contacted me directly. They asked for money. They said if I didn't pay them to continue supporting you, they would send you back to the foster system. I refused. I believed they were bluffing. 9 days later, they put you on a plane to France. You were 16 years old. I watched you arrive at the group home in Marseille. I watched you learn French, find work, put yourself through school. I wanted so badly to reveal myself, but I thought, if she can do all this alone, she must not need an old woman complicating her life. I was wrong. I should have come to you sooner. You were never unwanted. You were loved from afar, imperfectly, but completely. Always. The room was silent. I felt tears streaming down my face, but I didn't wipe them away. Then Richard exploded. This is hearsay. That woman was senile. We never, Mr. Ashford. Judge Marat's voice cut through like a blade. Sit down. We cared for that child for 13 years. We have rights. You have the right to remain silent, she said, her voice dropping to a terrifying calm, which I strongly suggest you exercise. Diane was sobbing openly. We loved her. We did. You contacted my grandmother and demanded money, I said, standing up, my voice shaking but loud. When she refused, you abandoned me. That's not a mistake. That's a transaction. She owes us, Richard shouted. We gave her everything. You gave me nothing, I said. You used me. When I stopped being useful, you threw me away. Then a small voice cut through the chaos. It's true. Everyone turned. Megan had stood up. Her face was pale, but her voice didn't waver. I heard them, she said. Years ago, I was maybe 12. They were fighting about money and Dad said. He said Harper was a losing bet. He said they should have cut their losses sooner. Diane's face went white. Megan, sweetheart, you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. Megan looked at me. I'm sorry, Harper. I should have said something sooner. Judge Marat waited until the room settled. I've heard enough, she said. The claim brought by Richard and Diane Ashford is rejected in its entirety. Diane let out a wail. The evidence presented today demonstrates that the petitioners adopted Harper Ashford with the explicit intention of accessing her biological family's wealth. When that plan failed, they terminated their parental responsibilities and abandoned a minor child in a foreign country. This is not a family dispute. This is attempted fraud. The words landed like stones. Furthermore, Judge Marat continued, I am referring this case file to the appropriate authorities for investigation into potential adoption fraud and child abandonment. She gathered her papers. Ms. Ashford, you are the sole and rightful heir. Your grandmother would be proud of you. Diane rushed toward me, arms outstretched. Harper, please. I stepped back. You were never my mother. I don't need your apology. I just need you to leave me alone. Permanently. I turned and walked out of that courtroom with Sophie on one side and 12 years of silence finally broken behind me. 3 days later, the story broke. A French journalist had overheard enough to start digging. Her article ran in a regional paper first, then got picked up by larger outlets. American couple sues adopted daughter for inheritance. Court reveals 16-year fraud scheme. Within a week, it had crossed the Atlantic. Diane's Facebook went dark. Richard's LinkedIn disappeared. The country club asked them to resign. The comments were brutal. Thousands of strangers calling them monsters. Part of me felt satisfaction. A larger part felt hollow. But then, a package arrived from Megan. Inside was a small box of photographs. Pictures of me as a child that Richard and Diane had planned to throw away. The note said, "These belong to you. I'm sorry it took me so long to do the right thing." 3 months later, I moved into the villa. I used part of the inheritance to establish a scholarship fund for young people aging out of foster care. I named it after my mother, Elise Delacroix. The rest I invested carefully. I wanted it to last. I wanted it to matter. Sophie came down for a long weekend in June. We sat on the terrace, drinking wine from grapes my grandmother had planted. Have you heard from them? She asked. The Ashfords. I swirled my glass. Nothing. I blocked their numbers. Apparently they've moved to Arizona, running from their reputation. I looked out over the vineyard. I don't think about them much anymore. It feels like forgetting. That's healthy, Sophie said. It feels like healing. I paused. I can't always tell the difference. A month later, Megan sent me another message. She had moved out of her parents' house. She was going to therapy. She wrote, I know we're not really sisters, but I'd like to be friends someday. I thought about it for a long time. Then I wrote back, I'd like that too, not forgiveness, not forgetting, just forward. And that finally was enough. If there is one thing I've learned from all of this, it's this. You don't owe anyone your loyalty just because they have a title. Mother, father, family. Those words mean nothing without the actions to back them up. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's how you protect your peace. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who only see you as a means to an end. If this story gave you chills, smash that like button and tell us in the comments, what is the most satisfying revenge you have ever witnessed? And of course, subscribe for more stories like this. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Take care of yourself.